All right, Walter Reuther, what is Reutherism?
Well, I'm not sure what Reutherism is, but I can tell you what I believe. I believe, to begin with, that free labor and free management have a great deal more in common than they have in conflict. And I believe that freedom is an indivisible value, that you can't have free labor without free management, and that we both need to learn to work and cooperate together to preserve our free society in a free world.
Unless you're a UAW member or a student of history, you might not know the name Walter Reuther. But if you were to examine the economic climate and the reasons the labor movement took hold in 2023, and then compare it to the lead-up of the UAW strikes of the 1930s and 1940s, you would find many parallels, some by chance and some by design. And at the center of it all was Walter Reuther. From the early age of 15, he experienced firsthand the injustices that workers face in factories all across America, from 24-hour shifts to production line speedups and grievous injuries that workers would sustain. He himself lost part of his foot when a 400-pound die fell on him while working for his first employer, Wheeling Steel Company. Evidence of the harsh conditions that he and his fellow workers faced was kept in a ledger, titled Deaths, which accounted for all who died on the job at Wheeling Steel. He eventually would move to Detroit, looking for bigger and better things, and found employ with Ford, but only for a few years, as the Great Depression took hold of the country. It would be 1935, when Walter would decide the labor of America was ready for unionization, and joined the UAW, even though he was no longer an auto worker, but his brother Victor was. Walter had him take a job at a brake drum plant in Detroit that was infamous for the mistreatment of workers, and when management decided they wanted to speed up the line, Victor cried out, "Strike! Enough of this speed up!" The tactic the workers used to strike was called a sit-down, where instead of picketing outside of the plant, they would shut down the production line and sit down at their stations, as this would prevent replacements, or scabs or strikebreakers, from coming in and doing the jobs for them.
Well, the strike has ended, thanks to these good men who are about me here. I trust it will mean a new mutual atmosphere of goodwill and good faith between employer and employee.
General Motors workers in Flint get the news of the settlement, and the celebration is spontaneous. The flag tells you how the people feel. They have just won back one of their constitutional rights. Home is the sit-downer. After the long, patient struggle in the factory, the men go home. What these people are celebrating deep into the night is the end of an impossible and unbearable subjection. Unions have brought wage earners so much security and freedom and dignity that it isn't easy even to recall the terrible oppression that came to an end with the winning of the sit-down strike.
Jumping back to the present, Shawn Fain's UAW uses a similarly named strategy called a stand-up strike. Comparing the names alone, one might think they're the same methods, but in reality they're not. Fain uses the terminology stand up only as a callback to the 1936 strike at Kelsey Hayes' brake drum plant, which would turn the UAW into a force to be reckoned with. Because when Walter's strike resolved itself, winning higher pay, layoff protections, and reduced production speedups, his local's membership swelled from just 500 to 35,000 within a year. Though their strike tactics differ, the men share common roots, with Fain being a lifelong UAW member, starting his career working as an electrician at Chrysler's Kokomo casting plant in Indiana. And like Walter's Great Depression strikes, he's no stranger to strikes during economic hardship himself, having been a UAW negotiator during the Chrysler bankruptcy after the Great Financial Crisis. Famously within the UAW, he resisted the concessions the automakers and government were wanting from the union, fighting hard against the implementation of the tiered pay system that they are close to eliminating in the 2023 union strike and negotiations. He was quoted during the council meeting in 2007 saying, "Two-tier wages have no place in this union. If you vote for this agreement, you might as well get a gun and shoot yourself in the head." This is the man who Ford, GM, and Stellantis are bargaining with right now. No nonsense would be one way to describe him, but where Fain would use his bluster and bravado to rally the troops, Walter was a bit more polished and long-winded.
And one of the things he said in describing the purpose of government, he said the purpose of government in a free society is to create an instrument by which people working together can do things that are impossible for them to do in their separate capacities. And that's what the union is all about. It's about joining with your fellow worker so that together you can do things that you can't do alone.
Regardless of their styles, both men have found ways to energize labor, not just within your union, but really from all over the world. I'm sure if the internet was around during Walter's times, he'll pull some decent numbers during his speeches. But we can be more than sure that whenever Fain goes live on YouTube or Facebook, that it's a must-watch event, even if you're not a UAW member. And as Walter strengthened the UAW by successfully striking and increasing membership, Fain is on a similar path, looking to find a win against the Detroit Three and then unionize every single other automotive factory in America. UAW membership has been on a decline since the 1970s, where they numbered over 1 million, but now their numbers sit at just 372,000. Playing off a speech by Bill Ford Jr., where the executive chairman called Tesla, Honda, Toyota, and other foreign transplant automakers as the enemy, Fain said in his latest appearance that the auto workers at those companies are future UAW members. And maybe they are, because if the union can secure all the wage increases and benefits they're looking for, the gap between UAW pay and non-union pay will be ever greater.
Industry estimates of all-in per-employee per-hour costs are far lower at Tesla than at any of the big three automakers. This is partly because Tesla is non-union. Its costs are also lower than those of foreign counterparts also running non-union factories.
And that means more now than in a long time, because inflation has been destroying the buying power, with most ordinary Americans living hand-to-mouth, with zero savings and maxed-out credit cards being charged the highest interest rates on that debt in history. And even with claims of having the tightest labor markets and record unemployment, you can go to social media and find videos of people going to grocery stores, trying to buy food, and only walking out with a bag or two that costs them $100. Or going to the gas station and seeing prices at $6 or $7 for a gallon. It's fitting that one of the catalysts for the 1945-46 UAW strikes was the ever-increasing rate of inflation, stemming from pent-up demand from returning soldiers of World War II and supply shortages due to most factories having been refit for the war effort. The inflation rate was 2.3% in 1945, and by the end of 1946, it was 18%. Another catalyst for the strike was the advent of automation. Nothing motivates innovation like life or death situations, and war is the ultimate version of that. Technology was advancing at a blistering pace, and auto workers felt the effects of this automation firsthand. Machines were replacing dozens of union jobs with just one or two overseers, and those jobs were highly skilled positions that a regular line worker couldn't just jump into. Walter felt the OEMs weren't using those machines for the benefit of society or for the workers, saying their newfound power was being used to maximize profits through plant scarcity and cutting of jobs. This parallels a sticking point in Shawn Fain's negotiations some 80 years after, and the point is electric vehicles. If we were all to switch from internal combustion engine vehicles to battery electric ones, studies say automakers would require 100,000 less auto workers. Ford CEO Jim Farley doesn't necessarily fight that notion and was asked a question in an earnings call about the transition. He responded with, "We absolutely have too many people in some places, no doubt about it. We have skills that don't work anymore, and we have jobs that need to change." It's not that these two UAW presidents are fearful of change or scared of technology. They either want to save as many union jobs for the members as possible, or in Shawn Fain's case, make sure the workers of new technologies like batteries and electric motors are union workers. Walter would be known to embrace these advancements, and during a Senate hearing, he was asked about his thoughts on machines replacing positions in manufacturing. He described a time when he was touring a Ford plant with acres of automated machinery with just a few workers manning a switchboard. He was asked by a manager what he thought, and Walter was impressed. The manager replied saying Walter wouldn't be able to collect union dues from all of these machines though. Jokingly, Walter responded with, "That's not what's bothering me. What's bothering me is, how are you going to sell Ford cars to all of these machines?" Walter's insight brings into mind, what do you do when robots take over all the jobs that people do? Money would be meaningless in that situation.
Technology does not have any morality. It has no human purpose. We have to give it human purpose. What good is the best tool in the world if you don't use it in terms of basic human needs? And so the great challenge is to relate this technological revolution, all these wonderful new tools, to relate those to the basic needs of the human family.
Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla, is working on creating truly autonomous robots. And when asked during an earnings call earlier this year what achieving artificial intelligence and autonomy would do to the economy, he would say, "Your economy is wisely infinite, or infinite for all intents and purposes." You can interpret Elon's words that a change would happen where a country's economy isn't tied to the production of people, but instead it would only be restricted by how many robots a country would have. Maybe we aren't exactly close to artificial general intelligence, but as we approach the singularity of it, no one would be surprised to see robotic humanoids doing jobs in factories that perhaps a union worker used to be doing. And Walter, being the ever-forward thinker, already laid out the UAW response for such a predicament: the 4-day work week.
We all know that living in a plant 7 days a week, 12 hours a day isn't living at all. We need real work-life balance so they can't just keep working us to death. Auto workers have families. Auto workers have communities. And auto workers deserve a life. That's why we're pushing for more paid time off and holidays and a shorter work week.
It may seem normal that 40 hours a week, or 8 hours a day, is the standard amount we should do. But have you ever questioned why it's 40 hours? Would you be happier or more productive working less? Is there some calculation that determined 40 hours a week was the optimal balance between work life and your personal life? The 8-hour workday had sort of a convergent evolution across the world, starting hundreds of years ago in Spain, with widespread adoption picking up speed in the early 1900s. Coincidentally, the popularization of the 8-hour workday for the automotive labor force started with Ford in 1914, when Henry Ford reduced the working day from 9 to 8 hours and doubled worker pay at the same time. Shortly before raising these wages, the company just installed their moving assembly line, a feat of innovation that improved productivity tremendously, shortening the time it took to build a car from 12 hours to just 1 hour and 33 minutes. If breakthroughs in technology that increased the profitability of the company was able to provide a better work-life balance in a doubling of wages in 1914, the UAW is asking just for a little of that over 100 years later. And it wasn't that Henry Ford was being a philanthropist in paying his workers more. The company benefited from it greatly by reducing the employee turnover rate, which reached 370% just after the assembly line was introduced. Ford wouldn't term paying his workers more just as a simple raise, but instead he called this compensation profit sharing, a term you hear in UAW negotiations to this very day. The change the union is trying to make isn't isolated just to their membership. They see these very public negotiations as a soapbox to speak to labor throughout the country. Walter and Fain want all workers to get higher pay and better conditions, and really just the same benefits their union workers get. Their message is very much a social commentary on corporate greed because they want to see higher wages with reduced product prices, considering their strikes occurred during sky-high inflation, which car companies contributed to while paying executives record salaries and their shareholders billions in dividends and buybacks. During the 1945-46 strikes, Walter created a slogan that sums up the concept in a way anyone could understand. Wage increases without price increases. Wage increases to be taken out of profits.
That's what this is all about. We don't just fight for ourselves, we fight for the entire working class. Everyone gains when we do well. We got to get back to setting the standard and raising the standard for workers everywhere.
Walter would go on to become a titan in not just the labor movement, but in the social and civil rights movements as well. This is the man who drew up the plan to mobilize America's automobile factories to help win World War II, a plan that was called 500 planes a day. He successfully lobbied President John F. Kennedy to create the Peace Corps and would advise Lyndon B. Johnson on a weekly basis. He would give Martin Luther King Jr. space at the UAW Solidarity House to organize the Walk to Freedom, the nation's largest civil rights demonstration at the time. A demonstration where King would deliver his I Have a Dream speech after walking with Walter down Woodward Avenue, and the two would plan to march on Washington together some months later. He would then go on to debate Premier Nikita Khrushchev over his mistreatment of the people of the Soviet Union, and President Kennedy would have Reuther attempt to negotiate with Fidel Castro after the Bay of Pigs debacle. And though Shawn Fain's career as UAW president has just started, if he's trying to follow in the footsteps of his predecessor, or at least is greatly influenced by him, then this is just the beginning of what could become a long-lasting battle between workers and management. Should Fain continue to channel the spirit of Walter Reuther, the leaders of industry should take heed of his demands of the Big Three and prepare for workers the country over to feel compelled to find and fight for their value, rallying behind their champion at the offices of the UAW. When you see the future in that way, and listen to the words of Tesla's Elon Musk, how he vilifies what he terms as the work-from-home class, and how out of touch people have become from the realities of blue-collar workers, you come to understand that he isn't talking to the analysts on earnings calls or the suits at CNBC or Bloomberg. He's relating to his factory workers. When he recounts his time sleeping on the floor of the Fremont plant, or that CEO pay should be tied to performance, he's speaking to the average, ordinary American, hoping they'll spare him and Tesla from unionization. The 1940s saw what history has called a strike wave, where over 4 million workers would strike across the United States, from the studios of Hollywood, California, to the automotive manufacturing hubs of Detroit and Flint, Michigan, and a crippling railroad strike that brought the nation to a standstill. And here we are today, a year after averting a railroad strike. We again have strikes across the United States, from the studios of Hollywood, California, to the automotive manufacturing hubs of Detroit and Flint, Michigan.